So trauma is a word that unfortunately has been really denigrated. And I want for you to explain what trauma means.
Very happy to do that. I am a trauma therapist. Trauma is something, so Dr. Blasey Ford talked a lot about brain chemistry and encoding of memories. I would refer you to her testimony if you want more of that. I'm definitely not a science wonk, but I do know trauma, both from my own experiences and those of my clients. And from the psychological material that is considered to be the standard in this and in other countries. A trauma occurs when a person is faced with either life-threatening behavior or something that intrudes upon their bodily integrity. So whether or not the person thinks they may die, a sexual violation is likely to be traumatic. When any of us are faced with any kind of threat, whether it's a sexual assault, you're hiking in the woods and you see a bear is running towards you, your body brain is going to react with fight or flight. It's automatic. It's not something that you typically are going to stand there and think, I need to fight or I need to run. It happens lightning fast. That is that helps us survive because that way we're not standing there thinking, which way should I go while the bear eats us? If we are trapped and we're unable to fight and unable to run, if the bear corners us, we're going to go into the highest level of activation, which is the freeze. And freeze is adaptive because we go numb and it prepares us to be eaten. Almost any child abuse is going to result in the person experiencing some freeze. And in most cases of sexual assault, the person is unable to escape. That's, until they, at least for part of the time, they may experience that feeling of being trapped. And so my understanding is that this unresolved fight or flight response is what results in the trauma.
Right. Yeah, so most of the people listening to the podcast probably know that I spent 26 years in the Army. I'm a combat vet, and
Cool.
I was a Black Hawk pilot, and so I know a little bit about stress response.
A little bit. Oh, my God.
And, I mean, one of the things, there are levels, like you were saying, of stress. And some of them are very functional for certain circumstances. So if you are in a certain level of stress response, you begin to lose fine motor control, but you have your gross motor control is excellent. And that is the point where you're most able to counter a physical threat. But there's a fine line between that and then moving into a higher level of stress where you begin to shut down. You freeze.
Yes.
While you're in these windows of stress, certain senses can shut down. So people who are in a combat situation in a firefight, they may be in a high level of stress where their gross motor control is very good, and they are at the optimum point of surviving that firefight. And during that firefight, at the end, they realize they didn't hear the weapons firing because their sense of hearing shut down completely. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, they won't suffer any damage to their hearing because of being in close proximity to weapons either. It's like the whole thing just shuts down.
I always wondered about that. Okay.
Yeah, and when their hearing comes back, sound suddenly floods back in. Mm-hmm. They become aware of it again. And then they become aware of, their buddy lying there, screaming because he's wounded or whatever. But they didn't hear any of that stuff going on while it was happening.
Fascinating. Basically, we screen out details that are not needed for our survival.
And so, it's no wonder that people who are faced with some kind of interpersonal violence would experience a gap where,
Yes.
I didn't hear, the loud noise next door because your hearing's shut down. It wasn't important right now.
What did he say to you?
Yeah. I don't know.
But I remember the laughter.
Yeah.
Is what she said.
Exactly. You remember specific things, or I don't remember anything that was said, but I remember his smell. There are specific details that still get through, but that's all part of that stress response. And there are ways of inoculating someone against that kind of stress. It's part of what combat training is supposed to do. You can stress inoculate, and pilot training is really good for it, by the way.
Are there any unintended side effects of that training? Are there any adverse effects of going through that training?
Well, not really, unless you get someone who becomes so hypervigilant all the time. And hopefully, there are psychological exams that people have to pass to get into certain career fields that would hopefully screen people out who are very susceptible to being, kind of stuck in this hypervigilant state.
Well, because you hear of so many veterans who maybe they performed really well in combat and then they come home and they feel out of touch, out of place, can't get along with their families. Those are men and women who've been traumatized.
Yeah, and that's actually the result of the actual trauma, because there's some things that you can improve someone's performance through stress inoculation. What you can't do is completely insulate them from experiencing the trauma that they'll see on a battlefield.
This seems like a great time to jump in with some information. There's a man named Bessel van der Kolk who is a great, psychiatrist, I think is his profession. He basically discovered post-traumatic stress disorder. And he went from working at the VA, I think this was like the late 60s, early 70s, was working at the VA with veterans, and the treatment was making them worse. And so he realized there's something going on here. Oh, they have post-traumatic stress. Went from there to work in a Boston hospital and was working with all these women who were sexually abused, which was a shocker for one thing, is they actually thought it was very rare at that time. And he noticed, these women are having the same symptoms as the male veterans I had been working with.
Right.
And I just kind of want to mention something that I have thought for many years, is that the people with whom I work, there's been a lot written about how the body's the battleground. These are people who have experienced trauma on the level or near levels of combat veterans.
Yes. And in fact, they used to call it rape trauma syndrome. Now it's actually recognized as it's actually PTSD. That's the result of interpersonal violence. And for a social species, interpersonal violence is the most terrifying event you can encounter. That when you're looking someone in the eye and they're either going to kill you or do serious bodily harm to you, that's the most terrifying situation you can be in. I would say it's even probably worse than being being eaten by a bear.
Yeah, because bears, that's what they do.
Yeah, it's just he's doing what he's doing, right?
You escape the bear. If you escape, people are going to say, what a great story, you escaped a bear.
Or how awful. I mean, that's clearly terrifying. Nobody's going to question you. What were you doing?
What were
you
wearing?
Did you have chapstick on you?
What were you wearing? Did you wear your bacon shirt that day?
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, so, God.